What is the summary? Just give you a sense of what Moody's rating services released today. It says that the new president, Tinubu's readiness to confront policy dilemma is credit positive but risky, because both initiatives, and quoting Moody's report, which came out this afternoon, the subsidy removal and unification of exchange rates are politically risky for Tinubu, who has a fragile mandate after winning only 8.8 million votes in a country with 93.5 million eligible voters. We'll talk about democracy in a short while. But again, both reforms, according to Moody's, will trigger a transitional period of higher inflation for Nigeria, because when you eliminate oil subsidy, that will raise oil prices. And when you unify the central bank exchange rate, that will weaken the naira. So what could be the consequence? Moody's says that could be social unrest. It's a risk that could derail Tinubu's reform agenda, as it did for President Goodluck Jonathan back in 2012 when he attempted oil subsidy reforms. Let's leave it there for now. Let's hear a whole lot more in that report, and you could just read that up. Let's get them. Well, Africans are getting less satisfied with the way democracy is working across the continent, and that was according to the recently concluded conference of former heads of state and key elders of the continent held in Arusha, Tanzania. The CEO of Afrobarometer, Joseph Asuka, says at the summit that data pulled across 36 countries on the continent shows that 66% Africans prefer democracy to any other forms of governance. However, only 38% express satisfaction with the way democracy works in their countries. Joining me to discuss this is our Rice political editor, Sumner Sambo, in our Abuja studios. Good evening, Sumner. Let's mix politics with business as always. But tonight, we're talking about democracy, which has been described as the best form of governance by humans so far. But what do you make of this latest Afrobarometer statement on how democracy works in this part of the planet Earth?
Thank you so much, Bosun, and very warm evening to our viewers. That Afrobarometer report is actually one that needs to be taken cognizance of by a lot of people who watch good governance on the continent, because one key factor that really shook me from that report is the statement that 53% of Africans are willing to embrace any coup leader who decides to overthrow a democratically elected government that has refused to act democratically. So Africans are saying that, yes, majority of them do not like coups, and the eras of coup are over, but in the instance where there is an abuse of democracy and democratic practices, that over half of Africans will accept that. And I think it's something that should give all of us some concerns. And considering what has been happening of recent, whereby a lot of people continue, especially African leaders, continue to want to promote developmental authoritarianism, which they sort of feel is what's happening in China, trying to see how they can center around one party state and promote their ideologies through that one-party state, is something that calls for concerns. Good enough, the new president of Nigeria, President Bola Tinubu, had just a week and a few days ago said that he wouldn't tolerate the issues of coups in West Africa. And of course, while in Kenya, he was urging other African leaders to stand up against the illegal takeover of power by the military and all of that. Nonetheless, what we see here is that the dividends of democracies, as we like to put it here in this part of the world, especially in Nigeria, is not reaching out to a lot of people. The economic indices are not trickling down for the benefit of people. And for the sustainability of democracy on the continent, you need not just elections to be holding, because that's the mistake that some of our leaders want to make us think, that because elections are holding perennially, that democracy is working. For about 53% of Africans in that Afrobarometer report to say that if a democratic government goes bad, because of the despotic tendencies of their leaders, that they are willing to accept military takeover is something that I think all of us need to really have a rethink.
So Sumner, I'm sure, yes, you're based in Nigeria, but of course you've got your eyes on Africa, Mali, China, and then Niger, and then, Chad, Mali, for example, and a few African countries. Even presidents such as Macky Sall, with news around whether he was going to do a third term and all that. Just a few weeks ago, we have elections coming up in Zimbabwe, with concerns about what is going to happen in South Africa, with the whole political issues around President Cyril Ramaphosa and whether he should is going for a second term, and the former President Jacob Zuma. So where's the missing link, my friend? You sit down with the politicians on a daily basis. I crunch market numbers. Where's the missing link between democracy, elections that you talk about, and good governance? So do you think if we keep having elections every 4 years, then democracy should naturally, or would naturally, sort itself out, deliver the dividend, as you said?
Well, the issue of democracy growing on the continent is one that a lot of Africans are really comfortable with. If you look at the report generally, it actually states that more Africans welcome democratic growth, and it's something that people who don't want to embrace the military intervention, naturally. But where you have elite-centered corruption, and you have, gangsters, and then a group of people who do not believe in the ideals of democracy but want to enjoy the powers of democracy, get into power and then misuse power and then center it within elites, then of course you understand that democracy will not grow. And once democracy doesn't grow, then of course there'll be problems. And the mistake that our leaders keep making is to think that because we have all the appurtenances of power, that's the way the average man thinks that, things are working very well. Because you have an executive, a legislature, and judiciary in place, and things seem to be moving well. The essence of democracy itself is not for us to be practicing democracy in name. It's for democracy to deliver the goods. And which is the goods? Well, which are the goods that we're talking about here? We're talking about free speech. We're talking about the ability to have food on your table. We're talking about economic policies that actually affect the people and the country positively, and not elite-centered policies. And look, for example, right now, we're having this sort of economic challenges in the country, and the elites, instead of bringing palliatives or making the average citizen to know that there are already alternatives, and those alternatives are being brought in place quickly and swiftly when you have the removal of the fuel subsidy, and then you have the unified exchange rate coming into place. We don't seem to be seeing those actions coming into play. And I don't know why the government seems to be toying with this issue, because we all know that in 2012, when the fuel subsidy was removed, it didn't really take so much time before the opposition and the labor unions and other civil society organizations organized themselves. So this government, for example, led by President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, is enjoying a lot of goodwill already. And I'm thinking that for them to have come into power since May 29, we would have had a plan that would have been executed immediately. But it looks like, yes, the president is feeling the temperature of the political situation right now. He has asked for a review of the proposed palliatives, but we have thought that the palliatives will be right on time. And so the feeling of the ordinary citizen is that democracy should be seen in action in terms of their welfare, in terms of their security, and in terms of freedom of speech. But if we don't see so much of that, then we'll get into problem.
Yeah, again, just to sum it up, it's a continuing conversation. By the way, President Suluhu of Tanzania was at this particular conference in Arusha, which we're discussing now, and she called for more practical and actionable solution to strengthen democracy. What more can be done, and by who, to deliver more values of democracy to the electorate and to the people in general? Who do you suggest? How can that be done? Give me 1 minute of that.
Well, yeah, actionable plans that the people will feel economic growth. Look, the major problem that we are facing right now on the continent is the issues of terrorism where non-state actors are oppressing people because they want political powers. And then you also have those who are within the military rank, and then they are being tempted by the appurtenances of political power to want to get into government. Now, what we can do is to make sure that the government is not made attractive too much. When we have the central governments or the federal governments across the continent having so much power to determine even the lives of everyday citizens, then we will be losing it. The idea of democracy is to ensure that people begin to witness economic growth. Now, you see that a lot of concentrated powers in the hands of despots will make them to see how they will concentrate powers within themselves, and they do not allow civil society to thrive. They do not allow, even within elections. The temptation here is for us to want to see people grabbing powers on themselves. People want to build one-party states. And because of that, we're having challenges. Look at Macky Sall. If not because of all the pressure from civil society and then, of course, from Friends of Africa, you would have seen that Macky Sall would have gone for a third term. And then you will see what's going on in Zimbabwe. A female politician was almost being shut out from contesting. Those kind of actions will overwhelm the polity. And, of course, people will see that certain people have been excluded out of political power, and it will lead to problems. Now, in the economic turmoil that we face across the continent, the leaders need to put actionable plans in place. Not that legislators will be asking for more monies, and then we'll see people in government living large. People who didn't have anything, but once they get into government, they live larger than life. People who are close to those in government, we see them receiving licenses for mining and all of that and so on. And people do not have access to state resources equally. So if we don't continue, like some of these elders at that conference had warned, to bring accountability to the fore, then there's going to be a problem, because the issue of accountability is a major challenge on the continent.
All right, thank you so much, Sumner Sambo, for those perspectives as always. Thank you so much for your time. Arise political editor in Abuja. Have a great evening. Thank you so much. Let's